Today, we are going to be talking about building and leading remote teams. Now, whenever I talk about remote teams, there's a few different definitions. So, one type of a remote team is a global remote team. So this is going to be if you have a dispersed team with people in multiple countries. If you have a globally remote team, go ahead and clap your hands 3 times. Okay, quite a few people. The next type of a remote team is someone who has a dispersed team, but we're in the same general geographic area. So you might have people that are in Magic Kingdom, some people in Animal Kingdom, some people at Epcot, but we're still all in Disney World, right? So we could all be in Atlanta, but we're all working remote. If you have a local remote team, go ahead and clap your hands 7 times. Numbers, I know, arithmetic. All right, all right, so we have a few people that are locally remote. And then the third type of a remote team is a remote team that has some people that are working remotely at home a few days, and then you go into the office for a couple of days. So you're spending some time remote and then some time in the office. If you have a hybrid of a remote team, go ahead and clap your hands 2 times. Okay. All right, we have a good mix of all 3. Whenever we are working with remote teams, we have to be mindful of the type of remote team that we have, because that is going to impact the way that we lead our organization. Someone that has a global remote team, the challenges that they face is going to be a little bit different. Here, you're going to be looking at different time zones. The weather may be affecting people differently. Whenever we were looking at COVID, that was affecting people differently that lived in different countries. If I'm working with a local remote team, those challenges are going to be a little bit different. We had a few people that were locally remote. Here, we're still going to be intentional to build those relationships. You might have different opportunities to create those experiences with everyone remote. And then if you're in a hybrid remote team, those challenges, again, are going to be different. You are going to have an opportunity to be in person, but we have to make sure that we're clarifying our expectations from the get-go in all 3. Whenever we are working with our teams, the first thing that we have to do is clearly communicate what our expectations are. This happens from the very beginning. Whenever we are building our team, we clarify these expectations in the onboarding process. I'm going to give you a quick activity that you can use. This is an activity that I use whenever I am working with new team members. I use this activity whenever I am leading a team remotely or in person with a new client, with a new team, and whenever we are beginning a new project. So I want everyone to pull out a piece of paper. If you don't have a piece of paper, I have some that you can get. Anyone wants some? All right, yeah, you can come on up. I'm going to ask if you can help hand these out. So here is the challenge that I'm going to give. Thank you very much. Hand those out. Here's the challenge. I want you to think about the team that you are currently in. And I want you to think about the performance expectations that you have. I want you to take your piece of paper, and I want you to draw 1 line horizontally and draw 3 lines vertically. So you should have 8 boxes total. Here's the challenge. I want you to draw, that's right, draw. I want you to draw a picture of a performance expectation that you have within your team. Let me give you an example. I'll give you a couple examples. In my organization, we are a globally remote team. We have people across the world. We have people across 4 different continents. And it is an expectation that we start meetings on time. Why? Because we have some people that have gotten up early, some people that are staying up late, in order for us all to have synchronous collaboration in these meetings. So it's really important that we are respectful and that we show up to meetings on time and that we start them in a timely manner. That's an expectation more for behavior. We have another expectation that our reports be done in a detailed manner. They're detailed, they are organized, and they are done in a timely manner, because that is the level of quality. Now we clarify, what does detailed mean, what does organized mean, and what does in a timely manner mean within our projects and with our reports. Why? Because we expect excellence within our reporting in our organization. So for time, I might draw a time, 2 hands. For reports, I might draw a report, all right? I'm going to give you 20 seconds per box to draw 8 different performance expectations of your team. That's right, 20 seconds per box to draw 8 different performance expectations in your team. At the end of about 2.5 minutes, you'll have 8 different performance expectations. Are you ready? This is a challenging, all right, different performance expectations. Okay, on your mark. Get set, go. What is a performance expectation that you have in your team? Doesn't have to be a great picture. Okay, you're on to that next box. Now you're going to draw a different performance expectation that you have within your team. This time is going to go fast. Okay, you're on to that third box. What's a third performance expectation that you have within your team? Okay, move on to that fourth box. You're about halfway done. This is when it starts getting a bit challenging. Okay, you're on to that fifth box. Almost done. All right, now you go to that next box. Just a few more performance expectations left. What are some expectations that you have within your team? Performance expectations you have. Okay, you're on to that next box. And we have 2 left. Okay, you're on to that last box. Your last performance expectation. Three, 2, 1, and time. Okay, give me some feedback. On a scale of fists to 5, 5 being, Amber, that was the hardest thing ever. Don't ever make me do that again. 0 being, that was pretty easy. I think I could have come up with 3 more, 4 more expectations. Give me some feedback. How was that? Yeah, fist to 5. All right, I'm seeing, I think that's a 3, yeah. 3, 2, 4, 3, 5, 0, 2. Yeah, I'm seeing 0 through 5 coming up. This is a powerful activity for a few reasons. First, it is a clear way for you to identify the expectations that you have within your team. This is something I'll do with my team, and then we'll take the time to share some of these expectations. The goal is to have 5 or more, 5 out of 8, 5 or more areas of similarity. If you have 5 or more areas of similarity, then that's an opportunity for you to take those expectations and refine and have further conversation. Now, sometimes I'll do this with teams. I was working with a DevOps team a couple months ago, and they had a lot of frustration. They had a lot of miscommunication and a lot of performance expectations that were not being met. So we did this activity, took us only about 2.5 minutes, and we discovered that there was only one area of similarity, 1 out of 8. This was a really good opportunity for us to have a continuous conversation, especially within a remote environment, to clarify, what does success look like here? Now, we did this activity through drawing pictures. I personally prefer this style of method, this style of communication, especially if you're working in a globally remote team where language barriers may be a challenge. And so here, we're actually using images over words to create a more inclusive activity for everyone to be involved, especially if you're working in an international or multinational organization or team. From an activity like this, now you can use this specific activity, I wanted to give you a specific tool that you can use, or using a different tool to clarify expectations. You need to communicate clearly what those expectations are, and then move in to proactive conversations. Now, a proactive conversation is a conversation that I use at the beginning of a project whenever I'm bringing in a new team, and it is critical if you are in a remote team. In a remote team, you're probably not going to see my face get red in frustration. You're probably not going to see the shoulders begin to scrunch up. You're not going to see some of that conflict, tension, and frustration. And so a proactive conversation goes a little something like this. At some point in our working relationship, there's probably going to be tension. At some point in our project, there's probably going to be disagreement, tension, frustration. And so while the emotions are low now, before anything's even happened, let us proactively discuss how we're going to handle that situation whenever it inevitably arises. Now, within some teams, we'll even go a step further and we will identify specific areas where there may be tension. So you might be looking at different personalities. So for example, I know that I am a big visionary type of person. I am not very good with the details. I have team members that are very good with the details. And so we're going to have a very specific proactive conversation. Hey, we're about to work on a 2-year project. Let's have a proactive conversation of how we're going to handle tension whenever it arises. Now, this is much more than going beyond, hey, if there's a problem, bring it up. We have to be more specific than that. I was working with one team, and they had a habit of being in paralysis analysis. And so they actually started time boxing their discussion time, right? So we're going to bring up an idea, we're going to time box the discussion time, final remarks, and then we have Elmo time, which stands for enough, let's move on. All right, so they'd say, okay, we're going to Elmo this decision. There was another organization that we were working with that they had a similar challenge with projects. So it was never quite good enough to call done on the projects they were working on. So they implemented Getmo, which was good enough to move on. Right? It's not going to be fully perfect every single time, but this is good enough for us to move on to that next step. We can address those next challenges in our next iteration. So we're going to have these proactive conversations and get very specific so that we can have a game plan. Again, especially if you're working in an international team, then conflict and tension is addressed differently in different cultures. So you need to have a standard that you have agreed upon within your organization and how you're going to address these challenges. And this helps to confront one of the greatest barriers to excellent team performance within organizations, and that is the fundamental attribution error. Now, the fundamental attribution error is really just a fancy way of saying that too often times we judge other people by their actions, by their outcomes, while we judge ourselves by our intentions. We see this whenever we're working on projects all the time. Say someone totally messes up on writing their code, and you might think, what were they thinking? We're looking at the outcome. Instead, we have to ask for the intention. I was working with one team, and the team was so done with one of their team members. They came and they said, Amber, whenever this person speaks at meetings, they are abrupt. Whenever they speak at meetings, they're abrasive. Some even said malicious. And so we kept the fundamental attribution error in mind. We asked the question, what is your intention whenever you're speaking at meetings? We found that he was intending to be passionate. He was intending to be persuasive. And so there was actually a gap between intended behavior and perceived behavior. And by asking for intention first, we were able to bring the two closer together by asking those meaningful questions. We must be mindful of the fundamental attribution error as we are working, especially within our remote teams. There's a lot going on that we don't see, and so we have to seek that understanding first. Feedback is one of the #1 questions that I get with remote teams specifically. How do we give meaningful, effective feedback within our remote teams? In fact, there are 3 major purposes to feedback. The first is to correct undesired behavior. The next is to encourage desired behavior. And then third, it is to coach or improve upon existing behavior. Knowing the purpose of your feedback before you go into a feedback conversation is going to be really critical. Effective corrective feedback means that the person will know specifically what action is being corrected. We must get specific to be strategic. Encouraging feedback is much more than saying good job. It's actually giving enough information so the person knows what action should be repeated. And then with coaching, we're specifically identifying what action can be built upon. This is a feedback model that you can use whenever you are giving your feedback. So especially if you are utilizing coaching or correcting feedback, especially with coaching or correcting feedback, we're going to first seek understanding. All right, so this is where we're going to be mindful of that fundamental attribution error. Ask, hey, what's going on? Especially in a remote team. You're not seeing the shoulders rise. You're not seeing everything that's going on around the team, around the person that's working at home, working at the cafe. We're going to seek understanding first. And then we're going to move into the purpose of our feedback, which, this is very simple. We're going to use a what-why model. So what specific action, if we're giving encouraging feedback, what specific action do we want repeated, and what was the impact of that positive action? I'll give you an example. There was a person in my team, they're working on a new presentation. Specifically, give her some feedback just yesterday, said this style of presentation had a lot of images and give a very clear idea of what you were trying to convey, and as a result, I was able to follow your conversation much more clearly. Now she knows specifically what to do and why it was important. We're going to have an action step. Continue doing that. Continue using images, using powerful storytelling to convey that message. And then we're going to follow up. So if you're giving encouraging feedback, now what if we are having a tough conversation within our team? Well, if we have performance expectations that while we clarified them, we've clearly communicated these expectations, we need to have a conversation because those expectations have not been met. We're going to go through this exact same model, except now we're going to use this model twice, or we're going to go through the what-why model twice. So first, seek understanding. What's going on? Be mindful of that fundamental attribution error. Then we're going to have a conversation with our team members to identify what was the undesired behavior and why was that ineffective. What was the undesired product? And why was that undesired? What was the impact? Then we're going to go into a second layer. What is a preferred action? All right, we don't want to do this. Let's move into the positive model. What should we do? And then, this part is often missed. Why is that the preferred action? What's an alternative result? This specific part right here of this second why, that's going to increase understanding, increase buy-in, have a much more healthy conversation. Now we're going into that positive. This is what we want instead. Clarify the action step. Clarify that action step. Don't leave it up to chance. Repeat that back. And then, this part is missed also as well. Follow up. Don't have a tough conversation, especially in a remote team. Conversations have to be intentional. They have to be intentional. Follow up with your team members. Now, your conversations should not always be just to give feedback on your performance. You should be having these check-ins with your team members habitually. Team building, trust building, that is not a single activity. We have a lot of people call and say, Amber, we have a lot of trust issues within our team. Come give a 1-hour session. We're going to improve our trust. It's not going to happen that way. We cannot improve our trust within a 1-hour session. It is small habits repeated over time. Team building is not an activity. Team building is a habit. So again, team building, it's not an activity. It's a habit that you're going to be repeating over time. Now, there are some teams, some organizations that, as a rule, they check in with every single team member once a week. I'll tell you, as our team grew, I found that that was unsustainable as I was leading our team. And so what I did is I actually split the team. So I did a check-in with half the team one week and then checked in with the other team, or with the other half of the team, the next week. As the team continued to grow, I actually split it once more. So now, every 3 weeks, I'm checking in with each person. So here, I'm still getting in that check-in. We're still having a conversation, but it's at a more sustainable pace as our team continues to grow. So you can use that as a freedom if you're leading a team. You can still have those check-ins, but if you're spending 25 hours of your week every week doing these check-ins, consider splitting that up in a way that you're still being intentional with your conversations, but it's also a sustainable rate for you as well. So how often should you be giving feedback, or should you be checking in virtually? So I gave you an example of having these one-on-ones. You can split that up according to your team size, your bandwidth. Most studies are showing that, specifically with Gen Z and millennials, the preferred rate of feedback informally, so this could be a quick message that you send on Slack, it could be a quick shout out that you have in a meeting. The preferred rate of feedback is 2 to 3 times a week, which to me that seemed like quite a bit. But that's the preferred rate of feedback. Now, to me, that did seem like quite a bit at the beginning, and so what I started doing is giving these quick messages on Slack. Hey, I noticed that you did this. Here's some feedback here. And then we would move forward, right? So there are some quick ways that you can give feedback informally. With formal feedback, that's going to be a review that you give. The preferred rate is quarterly or bi-monthly. This is a love letter. It was actually written to my great-grandmother in 1908, and it's from a man named Otis. And it reads, "Fall off the roof, fall down the cellar, but don't fall in love with another feller." Our method of communication is really powerful. What makes love letters so powerful? There's a few things. First, it's the intention that it takes to write a letter. It's something physical that you get to hold in your hand. But another reason why love letters are so powerful is there is a span of time between correspondence. There is a span of time between each message for you to absorb, for you to digest the message. It's a time for emotions to rise as you are contemplating and thinking about, oh, I'm not going to fall off the roof and fall down the cellar, but don't fall in love with another feller. Now, this is really desired in a love letter. This is not as desired in an email. You need to consider the method of your communication in addition to the message. Now, this is more of a spectrum of the rate of your feedback loops. So over here, we're going to have very fast feedback loops. This is going to be in-person, virtual events, telephone calls. Over here, we have this side of the spectrum is going to be more memos. It could be an email, could be text. If you're me, that's a really slow feedback loop. So we have to consider the method of delivery in addition to the message in our communication. 3 things that I keep in mind is first, the emotional nature of the message. So if it's a highly emotional message, I need to be over here. Fast feedback loops. We have some messages that started off medium-sized emotion, but because we started off with an email, there's time in between each correspondence for the emotion to build. Then we have a conversation that is much more emotional than what it needed to be if we would have changed our method of communication. We need to consider the emotion of our message. We also need to consider the complexity of our message. If it's high complexity, we need more synchronous communication rather than async. We also need to consider the person. Some people, it's going to be better to have faster feedback loops within our communication. Some people, they're going to prefer more of that async communication. I love this quote by Stephen Covey. He writes that in a trusting relationship, you can say the wrong thing and people will still get your meaning. But in low trust, you can be very measured, even precise, and they can misinterpret you. So we need to be very intentional. These are quick habits that we can implement within our remote teams to create that trust. Trust is small movements repeated over time. Many micro opportunities repeated over time. Now, I've given you a lot of information. Hopefully you've gained a lot of tools on how you can clarify expectations, how you can have conversations about different expectations within your team, and create a clearer sense of camaraderie amongst your team. But sometimes, whenever I've gained a lot of different tools, I'm reminded a few years ago whenever I actually became a football coach or a soccer coach for Paris Saint-Germain in India. So I was actually the only American, the only female, and the only blonde academy football coach for Paris Saint-Germain in Bangalore, India. And as I was coaching the teams, I had one of my youngest players from one of my youngest teams. His name was Achintya, and he was about 6 years old, and it was his very first day of football. He came running out onto the field on his very first day, and he began yelling, "Pass! Pass! Pass!" Now I noticed that Achintya was yelling pass even whenever the other team had the ball. And Achintya was yelling pass even whenever he was miles away from the action. And Achintya was yelling pass even whenever he had the ball. So then he was running with the ball, going pass, pass, pass. And so I looked at Achintya, I said, "Achintya, why are you yelling pass?" And he looked up at me and he said, "Mr. Brahman, I do not know what it means. I only know it is a football word." You know, sometimes organizations can sound a little bit like my friend Achintya. Yelling, "Leadership, teamwork, communication, remote team building, we got this!" Because we know these are really good words. that can lead to big goals. But if we're in the wrong position, if we're miles away from the action, or even if we have the ball and we don't know in which direction we're going, then saying these words are not only ineffective, but they're actually detrimental to our overall communication within the team. Eventually, the team is going to tune you out. But if you first take the time to build your team, clearly lay out the expectations, communicate and clarify performance expectations within your team, and then clearly communicate and give feedback to your team in a specific and in a timely manner with follow-up. And if we create opportunities on a habitual basis, on a regular basis, and we implement habits that can continuously build trust within our teams, then we'll be in a position to yell pass, to receive the ball, to move forward, and to score really big goals within our organizations. I want to thank you all so much for having me here today. I want to thank you all so much for having me here today. Does anyone have any questions? All right. Well, yes. That was a good question. So, go ahead.
Yeah. So, from your talks, understood that communicating expectations is one-on-one is one best method. But how do we scale up beyond one-on-one? How can I communicate expectation at a team level? Sometimes organization has core values. How do I even communicate core values?
Oh, those are good. So those are two questions. I'm going to try and answer them both individually. So make sure everyone heard yes. So the first question was, how do we scale up communicating expectations? So one thing that you could do, so the activity that I gave you, I'll actually do that with my team. In the onboarding process and whenever we're starting a project, that's whenever I'm going to clarify those expectations more one-on-one. In the check-ins, we're going to clarify them one-on-one. In a team meeting, I might do an activity like that. That's 2.5 minutes of our time. And then clarify, okay, well, these are the 8 main expectations that I have. What are the 8 that you had? And if there's a lot of disconnect there, then we need to have a more team conversation. If we have 7 out of 8 of the same expectations, that's a good sign that you've clarified your expectations well. And then the conversation from there is, first off, I know what the expectation is. Do I know why that is the expectation? And then the next question is, what do we do whenever those expectations are not met? Right? So that's going to be more of a team conversation. It should be a collaborative, full value contract that you're creating. So expectations of this is how this is going to be handled. That is something, especially in a project, you can create those core values, those team values for that project. And this is how we've agreed to set our expectations and handle unmet expectations. Now, I gave you an example of using a picture. I will take time to do asynchronous setting expectations. So we could do this on a whiteboard. We could do this with Post-it notes. We could do it with an 8-box challenge. We're spending time to say, this is my understanding of the expectations. We're going to first check for understanding, all right? As a team, do we have these same expectations? Then we're going to move into, what do we do when they're not handled? What do we do whenever they're not met? Oh, this is why we are not collaborating well, because I am defining success on this project as making sure that it's done on time no matter what. You've identified this as, we have to make this perfect, time doesn't matter, right? So even though we both have a goal of doing this project well, we have different expectations of what takes priority. Does that give you a clear idea? Yeah, follow up, yeah.
just follow up is that leaders have been comfortable in doing one-on-ones, but I have not seen forums where leaders are doing the team expectation communication. What would be the right forum? Would you call that, okay, this is the right time, or do you have to explicitly block some time to do the team expectations? How would you do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So within our team, I'll tell you what we do within our team. We do both. So in our, stay away from this mic. So we have monthly meetings that we do as a team. Now we're discussing a lot of things as within our monthly meetings, but one of those item agendas monthly that we do is a quick activity to clarify expectations. So that is something that we habitually block 10, 15 minutes out of our agenda monthly to do. So that's a habit that we have within our team. So you can do that by habit, and then we also have triggers. So give you an example, we just launched a new product a couple weeks ago. At the beginning of that launch, we knew that was a big project and we needed to clarify expectations there. So for projects, that should be triggers of, okay, this is a change in dynamic, we need to clarify expectations. But then we also do that within our habit. For some teams that we've worked with, they will put in, it's not a lot of time, right? So we're looking at, if we're doing this consistently, it should not have to be a 3-hour conversation. If you're doing this, 15 minutes every month, then that's gonna be powerful. Within our team, yeah, we spend about 15 minutes each month. I've seen some teams that do it quarterly. I've seen some teams that do quick 5-minute activities weekly. To me, we were better at 15. We were better with 15 minutes monthly. So you have to find a pace of where you're going to be intentional, put that within your habit, and then also recognize opportunities within projects. In my opinion, if you're only waiting for big projects, you could go a long time without clarifying expectations, that there's habits that you can build within those meetings. Yeah, that's a good question. You had a second question with organizational core values. That's great. So there's a few activities you can do to reiterate those organizational core values. You could use the same habits of, okay, within this monthly meeting, quarterly meeting, right, there's going to be intentional time that we are planning to reiterate what those values are. That's your very, very basic level. More importantly, you can highlight when those values have been exemplified. So this person did this specifically. Whenever we talk about expecting excellence as a core value, and this person did this action, this is what we're talking about. This is what expecting excellence means here. So positive reinforcement, habitually, again, that's going to be those small actions repeated over time. Storytelling is going to be much more powerful than just stating what the core value is. Within our team, whenever we created our core values, we actually created stories while we were creating the value. I'll give you an example from a different company that I worked with. I worked with a company that did training and development, similar to what we do, but they did training and development, and they did a lot of events. So we have to put up a lot of chairs, and we have to pick up a lot of chairs. A core value for them was picking up chairs, which was essentially meant there is no job too small for you. So we would see the CEO, we would see the VP, would be picking up chairs. And that was a mental image that we all saw of, this is what this means here. And then we would turn that into our company language of, I saw Kyle cleaning out the closet, cleaning out the supply closet. That's a really good example of picking up chairs. You're the director of training, and I saw that you were cleaning out the closet. That's a good example. So reiterating that habitually, that's going to be your best way to live that out. But we started having that conversation of storytelling and clarifying the image at the very beginning. That way, whenever a person was onboarded, when a person came into a team, we could identify it very clearly and reinforce that. That could be a clear explanation, okay? Great questions. Any other questions? Okay, well, I want to thank you all so much for having me here today. If you have any other questions about how to build or lead your remote teams specifically or teams in general, please feel free to reach out. I'd love to have a conversation. Thank you.